Hillary for that. Okay. Welcome everyone to Ashby Village Science and Ideas Group series of talks. My name is Audrey Newman. I am a substitute this time for Joe Evinger, who is our regular coordinator and host. He will be returning next month for our November talk. This Science and Ideas Group has more than 60 members, as many of you may know, with varied backgrounds who share a common interest in science and new ideas. We meet here on Zoom on the second Thursday of each month at 3 o'clock and until approximately 4:30 p.m. We have a guest speaker each time who speaks to us on a topic related to science and new ideas. A discussion of the ideas presented follows each talk, and we hope that you will participate in that. Makes it very interesting. In November, that's next month, we will have a talk on the biology of tendons. We rely on our Science and Ideas Group members, all Ashby Village members, all invités, and all presenters for ideas about other new speakers and ways to connect with them. If you have ideas for topics and presenters, please be in contact with Joe Evinger by email. I believe his email address is in the chat box. Thanks to Hillary. Our talks are recorded and available on the Ashby Village website within a day or two. To see one of our talks, just go to the Ashby Village website homepage, click on YouTube up in the right-hand corner of the screen, then go click on playlists and choose the Science and Ideas Group to get a list of all our videos which have been recorded. I would also like to take a minute this time to tell you about a presentation sponsored by Ashby Village's Elder Action Group, which is part of their conservation efforts, and they will be presenting a presentation called The Problem with Plastics. So this will be on November 12th, and you can find a write-up about it on the calendar. Okay, now for the best part. Today, our topic is the fate of the condor. Our speaker is Alacia Welch, the Condor Program Manager and a park ranger at the Pinnacles National Park here in California. Alacia is well known to many for her longtime participation and contribution to the Pinnacles Condor Program. The Condor Program at Pinnacles is part of an effort of 5 release sites in Western North America to bring California condors back from a low of 22 individuals in the 1980s. Alacia's work now includes guiding condor recovery at Pinnacles National Park and beyond, monitoring condor activities and behaviors, educating the public, and veterinary work with condors that have been poisoned by consuming lead shot, which is present in dead animals that they eat. Alacia will speak with us today about the importance of vultures in the world and how California condors fit into the larger picture of environmental health. She will discuss the most significant threats to condor recovery and how they are similar and different to vulture declines in other parts of the world, especially India. Finally, she will tell us about the current status of condor reestablishment at the Pinnacles National Park and the outlook for their future. I hope you enjoy this talk, and also that you will participate in the discussion right after she finishes. So go ahead, Alacia. We're so happy to have you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Audrey. That was great. I really appreciate the introduction, and I'm glad to be here today to talk with everybody. I figured I'd give a little bit more about my past, and just what Audrey said is exactly what I'll be talking about here. So I started working at Pinnacles back in 2004 as an intern who was brought on to pull weeds and plant native plants. And then over the years, sort of transitioned into working with condors. So a few years in, I started doing condor stuff. And then I have not left. So I've been here for, gosh, almost 20 years now, and really love Pinnacles and love the condors and just the whole program. It's very satisfying and interesting work. So I'm happy to be here to tell you all about it. I have many years in the field and only a couple of years in the program manager position. So it's fun to sort of take on different roles within all of this. So today, the talk I'm going to give, I'm first going to start with kind of vultures of the world and their declines, and then transition more into the focus on California condors. So we'll get an overview of all the vultures, and then sort of hone in on California condors, and then talk about different aspects of their recovery, and then how Pinnacles fits into that and where we're at. So that is the plan. I have to get everything situated here in order to be able to transition between slides. So sorry if I look off screen from time to time. So why are vultures important? There are a number of vulture species around the world, and although they are not found in Australia or Antarctica, but vultures are found on all the other continents. And really, they are nature's cleanup crew, quite literally. Out there, they are, for the most part, scavengers, cleaning up dead things on the landscape. And by doing that, they're reducing the spread of disease. Condors and vultures are just considered like dead ends for pathogens. So like bacteria and stuff, if a condor eats something, it's just completely neutralized. It's amazing. Their whole system is all about being able to combat that kind of, rotting meat and everything that for us would be terrible to consume, but for them, they have no problem with it. And so they are able to reduce the spread of disease because, of course, with fewer dead things on the landscape, it is reducing the amount of time that you have that kind of bacteria growing. And you've also got things like less opportunities for, say, coyotes or dogs to come together and feed. And therefore, you see a reduction in the rate of rabies in places. So when you don't have the scavengers, you see increases in rabies and other diseases. And then also, another thing that we don't often think of is how vultures are culturally significant. And so there are many different indigenous people across the world that have very strong cultural ties or stories or some element of vultures play into their life. And so like in some places you have sky burials where it's sort of the way to go back to the earth is to be consumed by vultures. And then of course there are traditional stories often kind of around some of the ideas of being carried into the afterlife. And as you can imagine, condors are very closely affiliated with life and death in that way. But then some have tales of how condors can see into the future. And so there's sort of like a clairvoyance about them. Or vultures as well. So, you know, there's all these different ways that vultures are important in the world. And so let's look at all these different vultures that we have. So this is a diagram put together by a place called Animal Spot. I stole it from the internet. Thank you to whoever put this together. It's a great way to just see all of the different vultures that are out there. And you can see that they're divided into, you know, old world and new world vultures. Old world, of course, being Africa, Asia, and Europe. And there are 16 different species that are there. And then in the New World, which is North and South America, there are 7 species here. And that includes Andean and California condors. So of all of these species, the scary thing is all of these ones circled in red are endangered. And so as you can see, a lot of the vultures in India and Africa in particular are really not doing very well. And then in the New World, it's only the California condor that is endangered. So that is one reason why we do the work that we do, is to try to combat that. So as far as the vultures in the old world, there have been just massive vulture declines over the last couple of decades. In India and Pakistan in the 90s, there was a big problem with using an anti-inflammatory in livestock called diclofenac. It is a easy, fairly cheap anti-inflammatory used to ease the pain of, you know, cattle and other things. But it turns out to be incredibly toxic to vultures, and it caused a 99% decline in the populations of pretty much all the vultures found in India and Pakistan. So there are alternative drugs that can be used instead of diclofenac. And since the later 90s, all of the countries that were using diclofenac a lot have banned its use. But of course, when you have such a dramatic decline in a population, you know, the recovery takes a long time, and it's still, I would say, considered tenuous, given how many of those vultures you saw, you know, are endangered. And then in Africa, there are some other things going on there. A number of the species that are endangered in Africa are due to targeted poisoning, so more like taking chemicals and just putting them into dead animals on the landscape with the intention of poisoning vultures. And there's a few different reasons why people are doing that, but you know, one of them is vultures are very quick to come in to start feeding on something that has died. And so especially for folks that were doing like elephant poaching, the vultures basically are sentinels for the authorities to come and see where these things are happening. And so a lot of folks who were doing elephant poaching were then trying to kill off the vultures, because then the vultures can't show where they are. So definitely some sort of complicated things going on there. And I would say the challenges in Africa are not yet fully figured out as far as how to tackle them. So there's a lot of work going into outreach and trying to save the vultures there. So I'm going to shift gears into condors, but before I do that, do you have any questions so far about just vultures in general and their declines? Go ahead, Audrey. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. I wanted to ask about those vultures in India. Are they coming back? I mean, are they repopulating? have they been able to stop that one drug that you said was bad? Or
From what I can tell, overall, yeah, diclofenac is not being used like it was before, and other types of drugs are used instead that are not as toxic or not really toxic to vultures. But as far as, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the population levels are at right now. I do know that they're still considered critically endangered, though. So there may be, I'm sure there's some improvement, because the main threat has been reduced so much. But when it's, when populations are brought to such a low level, it really does take a long time to recover them.
well, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm not looking at the chat or anything. So if there are questions coming into the chat, maybe Hillary, if you could let me know and I can look at that.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Great, thank you. So I'll move into sort of the condor story a little bit more. So California condors, so for them, the story is kind of like what I was saying is going on in Africa, where we think a long time ago, in the 1800s or so, as Europeans were moving across the West, and really starting to, bring a lot of livestock and farming and things. There was a big push to just reduce or eliminate a lot of the predators on the landscape. And so condors sometimes were thought to be predators because they're really big birds, and so they must be, killing animals. And also, I think there was just the use of toxins and whatnot in carcasses in order to kill other things like grizzly bears, things like that. Also would end up not intentionally, but unintentionally killing condors. And so we think in the 1800s, early 1900s, there were probably a lot of poisoning events similar to what is going on now in Africa, that really caused a massive decline in condors. So the map here on the screen is showing the range that we estimate California condors were in the early 1800s. There are accounts by Lewis and Clark of coming across many, many condors along the Columbia River between Oregon and Washington. And so, we know they were up into that area. It's thought that they were all the way up into British Columbia, and down south into the northern parts of Mexico. So, they were covering quite a lot of area, but by the by the 1960s, there was just a dramatic reduction in the overall area covered by condors. So it really was just down into this sort of horseshoe shape of, Central and Southern California. So the horseshoe goes around the Central Valley. Condors don't really spend time out there, but they do spend time in all the mountain ranges that surround it. And then from the 1960s until the 80s, the population declined even more, so that the only area that condors were found are what are indicated on this map as little sanctuaries, north of Ventura and east of Santa Barbara there. And it was really unclear what was causing the decline in that time frame, because there really wasn't this kind of poisoning going on the landscape anymore, where you're just like lacing carcasses with poison or anything. And so it was just unknown, like, why the condors continued to decline so much. And so by the 1980s, every single condor was taken into captivity. The population had declined down to just 22, 25 birds, something like that. And so the decision was made, like, we just need to pull them all out of the wild. We're going to start captive breeding. Hopefully that works. Nobody was really sure that was going to work very well. And move on from there. And so as condors were brought into captivity, it turns out they did absolutely fine being reared in, like breeding in captivity and raising young and all of that. And so after a few years, it started to realize, like, well, now we have all these condors that we need to put back out into the world somewhere. And so how are we going to do that and where? And so since that time, there are now 6 release sites for California condors in North America. The very first site was back into the very last place that condors were. So that is in Southern California, outside Santa Barbara and Ventura. That was the first location that condors were reintroduced to the wild. And then there was a second site put forward out in Arizona, and they have been releasing condors since the late 90s in Arizona. And those condors venture up into Utah now and have been for a number of years. And then a third site was established on the Central Coast, and that one is managed by Ventana Wildlife Society. So that's over near Big Sur. Soon after that, another release site was established in Mexico, in Baja. And then after that was Pinnacles. We began releasing condors here back in 2003. And most recently, if you've been following along with condors at all, you may have heard just in the last year and a half that condors are now being released up in Northern California by the Yurok tribe in collaboration with Redwood National Park. So there's been a lot of news about that recently, which has been pretty exciting. So today we have about 350 condors flying across all of these sites. It's not that large of a number, but it's better than 25.
Wow, yeah.
And so while, we are in a better place than we were in the 80s, condors are still considered, critically endangered. So I'm going to talk a bit more about Pinnacles specifically, and why we were selected as a release site. And so Pinnacles is, it's a national park, so it's public land, but it's surrounded by privately owned agricultural land. So there's a lot of farming and livestock raising in the area just around the park. We are not that close to dense populations of people, but we are somewhat close to the Big Sur release site over on the coast. And so all of these things were factors that played into determining or deciding that Pinnacles should be a release site. And so when the release program began here back in 2003, it was with a lot of assistance from Ventana Wildlife Society. And to this day, we work very closely with them. We co-manage the Central California flock of condors. And so Pinnacles is pretty great. It has lots of nesting habitat. It's open space. There's a lot of places for condors to perch and just be condors. But it is a pretty small area. And so what's nice is that there's a lot of area outside the park where they can go forage, find food, find water. There's other nesting areas as well. So a little bit of condor facts for you. They are the largest soaring land bird in North America and have been around for at least 12,000 years. So we've got animals that have, survived a lot of other extinctions by other wildlife, and they have yet persisted to this day. They weigh about 20 pounds. They have a wingspan of almost 10 feet. They are entirely scavengers, so they only feed on dead things. We believe they live to at least 60 years old, maybe longer, but nobody's really been watching them for that long, so we don't know yet. And like a lot of other long-lived species, it does take them a while before they reach maturity. So for a condor to reach breeding age, it's usually at least 6 years old. And when they do breed, they only have one chick at a time. So typically every other year, they will have one chick. So because of this very slow reproductive rate, they are especially susceptible to threats to their population. And that is part of what I'll get into later about specifically what the challenges are for condors. But before I get into that, a little bit more about what we do in terms of releasing condors into the wild. So this is a picture that shows our aviary that we have in the park. It's a small building with a big netted section where the condors can hang out. It's where we hold condors before they're released. And it's also where we catch condors from the wild if we need to. So we have traps that are part of that we can then put the birds into the big aviary and hold them for a few days or however long. If we're holding birds before they've been released, we actually hold them for 6 or 8 weeks in there. So they get to spend quite a bit of time in there. So here's a couple of pictures. I've got the picture on the left shows a bunch of young condors. They all have the black heads. These are all ones that have not been released yet. And you can see that they all have tags on their wings. We outfit every single condor with a tag and a transmitter before it's released. And then the picture on the right is the very first flight for one of those birds as it figures out what to do with those really, really big wings. So when condors are first released into the wild, they just don't really know what they're doing. And it takes them a little while, a couple of weeks really, to kind of get things figured out of how to fly like they should, because of course they've never flown any distance more than 50 or 100 feet or something like that. So when we get condors out into the wild, we're out there tracking them with equipment that looks like this, a little antenna, and it allows us to keep track of what's going on with them. And really, once birds are released into the wild, the whole idea is to try to figure out where they're going, what they're getting up to, and most importantly, if they die, why? What is the cause of death? And so that was the whole point of getting condors back out into the wild, is really figuring out why did they decline in the first place and how can we fix that? So with radio tracking, we can go out there and we can find them when they die. And over the years, what we have determined is that the number one cause of death for condors in the wild is lead poisoning. And it took a while to figure that out. And so through quite a bit of research with a number of different folks, we have come to determine that the primary cause of lead poisoning is indeed from ammunition. And so this is a picture that's an X-ray of a condor. And on in the big the big red circle, that's a piece of a lead bullet. And you can see that in the X-ray of the bird. And so this bird did die, and that bullet was pulled out, and then we got a photo of it. And it turns out, the lead in the bird, that it's in this case is not like the bird was shot. It is actually that the condor consumed the lead and then died from lead poisoning in that way. And so what we find is condors are scavenging across the landscape, and if they come across something that was shot with a lead bullet, they can either eat the whole bullet or pieces of it and get lead poisoning from that. So as we figured out that this was the main issue for condors, there was what do we do about that? How do we address this issue? And so there's been a multi-pronged effort to promote the use of copper ammunition instead of lead ammunition. Copper is much less toxic. In fact, we feel like overall it's pretty safe. If condors were to consume a copper bullet, they would probably be fine. But this kind of work to address the issue of lead ammunition is sensitive and requires a lot of different folks to collaborate and figure out how to do the best kind of messaging to change, to encourage folks to use the copper ammo. And so one of those things is like one-on-one demonstrations and public shooting events and hunter workshops. So here's a couple of pictures where we've got folks trying out the non-lead ammo, and then seeing that it indeed works like it should. So it performs in the way that you would like to see. And then there's a lot of online and media coverage as well. So there's a website, the huntingwithnonlead.org, which is a really great resource for anybody who gets out hunting. You can look up all sorts of types of ammunition that's available that is copper based, and really just like see a lot of the work that people are doing to show how this ammunition performs and all sorts of stuff. So it's really an excellent resource. But, we're also contributing to other work that's being done, and, giving media interviews and things like that. So there's lots of work to get the message out there using these different forums. There's also been work to just like table at events like hunter expos or other events like that. Anybody who walks by, if they're interested in knowing more, you can get as much information as you want from the folks that are staffing these booths. And this particular booth was, we were helping out our colleagues that work with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. And then our partners, Ventana Wildlife Society, they have been offering a free non-lead ammo program for a number of years now. They've given away thousands of boxes of ammunition, primarily to hunters that are in the Condor range, so like in Monterey and San Benito counties, but sometimes in counties beyond that, if there are condors in those areas too. So these are all the things that we're working with many of our partners to tackle this issue of really trying to get the lead out of the environment, because it turns out there is lead getting into the food chain, especially for scavengers. This is a huge problem for condors, but it is also a problem for eagles. And lead is a problem in some other species too, like in rivers and things like that. And so, many of you have probably heard of like some of the hunting regulations that changed in the 90s, where if you were hunting ducks or things like that, you had to switch from lead shot to steel shot. And that was only for that kind of thing. This that we're talking about is more like rifle type ammunition and hunting. So there's ongoing work with all of this. We wish that lead was no longer a problem for condors, but unfortunately it does remain a problem. There have been some big improvements, and we just hope that more and more people make the switch to using copper ammunition. And if that happens, and we really get most people doing that, then I think condors have a very good chance of recovering fully. So before I get on to other aspects of things we do with condors, I'd like to take any questions about this particular piece.
I have another question.
Okay.
Are there any special techniques that you would recommend for speaking with lead ammo users to convince them that non-lead is better for the world or for them personally or something?
I tend to encourage folks to check out the Hunting with Non-Lead website, because there's just going to be so much more detailed information that they can find there than a lot of other places. There are some really great podcasts out there that do talk about some of the benefits of using the copper ammunition. And those, I believe, are also linked on that Hunting with Non-Lead site. So it's a really good clearinghouse to go to for specifics. But if somebody is talking about hunting and how they've always used lead their whole lives and all of that, it can be a challenge. So unless you feel like you have a lot of the information at hand, it's probably best just to direct them to some of these other resources that are out there. But encourage them to check it out.
Do steel bullets and copper bullets or ammunition give you different aerodynamics in shooting? I mean, do they have to learn how to aim again?
Yeah, any kind of new ammunition that you're using in a particular firearm, you have to sight it in. So yes, there is an element of getting it all, situated before you go out and start hunting.
Sally had a question that may be answered by that. Sally, do you want to elaborate on your question? Why is there a reason to prefer lead over copper other than that you have to relearn how to shoot?
Lead ammunition has been used for a really long time. It is the type of ammo that most people have used since they were, first learning how to hunt. And so there's a familiarity with it. The copper ammo is a newer type of ammunition. And, with that, often there can be hesitation to try something new. That's one thing. The cost of it depends. Overall, you will hear that the cost of it is a big challenge for some people, and I think that's true for certain situations. But in general, the cost of ammo is a small part of the whole cost of how much it is for doing hunting. So overall, it seems like the cost of it is not a truly limiting factor, but it is something that many people bring up. The cost of copper ammo, especially because it's considered a premium type of ammunition, is certainly more expensive than your like bottom shelf lead ammo that's available.
Roger also had a question related to lead ammo.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask about turkey vultures. I noticed that the range of the condors and the turkey vultures overlaps considerably.
Yeah.
And maybe even the black vultures, I suppose, in the south. But I'm just wondering, how do they differentiate their niches? And also, what are the turkey vultures also susceptible to the lead poisoning?
Right. Niche wise, I mean, overall, they do all consume, the same stuff. Vultures, the turkey and black vultures sometimes go for some smaller things that the condors will not, but they certainly all will share a large carcass. So overall, they are utilizing the same food sources. So yeah, then the question is, why is it that turkey vultures and black vultures don't have the same problems as condors when it comes to lead poisoning? And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is turkey vultures reach maturity at a younger age, and they produce more young faster. So they have 2 to 3 young per year, as opposed to 1 every other year. And I think turkey vultures at least are able to breed when they reach 3 years old, I think. So, they're just quicker and faster at reproducing. And so that's one big piece of it, is their population is able to sustain a higher level of mortality potentially from things like lead poisoning than condors can.
Sheila also had a question. Sheila, do you want to ask your question? Unmute yourself. Great, go ahead.
It's not about the lead problem, but that I've read recently that avian flu has started to affect the condors as well as other things. And I'm wondering whether that's being handled with vaccines and how successful it's been.
I am going to hold that thought. I have a slide about that in a little bit further on here. And if I don't answer your question about that, bring it back up.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Alan asked about the people who shoot the animal, the birds, if they eat them, do they get lead poisoning too?
So this is if people are shooting animals and then they're eating the meat, are they potentially getting lead poisoned as well? Yeah, right. I don't know a huge amount of the specifics on the human health side of things about this, but the short answer is potentially, and probably somewhat limited. But yeah, there have been some studies, especially looking at subsistence hunters, where during the that are using lead ammunition for hunting, and that's primarily the meat that they're eating. They do have higher levels of lead than others. And so, as everybody knows, lead in people is really not good either. And so, yeah, there is a risk of consuming small pieces of lead in the meat.
Probably especially for children.
Yeah, definitely a concern for children. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so on to some of the other things that we do at Pinnacles with condors. So every year we are trapping all the condors that are out in the wild and doing health checks on them. Because there are so few condors, we at Pinnacles are managing about 25 to 30 of them. We really are monitoring every single bird individually. So each condor has a unique tag that is on its wing. And we do trap them every year with the intention of checking their health, testing their blood for lead exposure, swapping out those transmitters, and more recently, we are also testing for avian flu. And so these are all the things that we're trying to do with the birds. And when we get a condor in hand, we run a blood test to see what the lead level is. And if we find that the condor has been exposed, then it comes out of the wild and goes and gets x-rayed and then treated. And usually if we catch a condor before it's showing really bad clinical signs of lead poisoning, it will be re-released back into the wild. And so that is just a wonderful feeling of getting a condor back out there to fly another day. And so we do treat the condors. There is a series of shots that you give them. It's the same as you would give a person. So it's called chelation, and it does really help bring the lead level down so that they have less of a risk of getting long-term issues from that particular exposure. Unfortunately, we never know when the condors are going to get into lead, so we do not always catch them in time. And so we do, every year we usually have a few birds that die from lead poisoning. But it really is wonderful to have them out, letting them go and just go do what they should do. So one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about is different things about condors in the news recently. And so I don't know if everybody can read all these headlines. So let me see if I can do it for you here. So the first one there is a man convicted of starting California wildfire that killed endangered condors was sentenced to 24 years in prison. So that is related to the Dolan fire. And the Dolan fire was in 2020. It was an arson fire that became a massive wildfire. And I'm sure all of you being in this area of California remember just how many fires there were in 2020 and how terrible that was. Well, the Dolan fire was one of those, and it was a particularly bad one for condors. So I'll talk a bit more about that. And then as whoever that was that just brought up avian flu, there indeed was a big outbreak of avian flu in condors in Arizona. And so when 21 critically endangered California condors have died from avian flu. So that was earlier this year. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work going into trying to address that. And then more recently, just in the last month, we had a whole group of condors that flew north up to the Mount Diablo area and got a little bit of press coverage about being that far north. And so that was exciting to see. We have had condors go up that far before, but it was good to see some different folks get excited about that. So the Dolan fire, just to go into it a little bit more, this particular fire ended up killing 12 condors I think it was 11 condors in one night and then one later on. That included 2 nestlings. It was pretty devastating. It completely wiped out the condor release pen and research facility that Ventana Wildlife Society manages over in the Big Sur Range. It was quite the thing. And amazingly though, still like 2 wild chicks were rescued. So one survived the fire. The fire burned below its nest tree. And that one ended up being taken into captivity a little bit after the fire and was raised there. And then another chick was evacuated from a nest before the fire got to it. And that one we were directly involved in. And so here's a couple of pictures from that rescue. One of the biologists here, Gavin, he's the one holding it on the left there with the big red helmet. He's got the chick in his arms. And then the second picture is me coming down the cliff with the chick in that big trash can to bring it down to the ground. And then it was driven down to the LA Zoo. Both condors did well once they were in care. And in fact, one of them has been re-released back into the wild and is doing just fine. The other one is genetically important and so is going into the captive breeding program. So it was really great to be able to at least, save a couple of birds when there was such a devastating fire. Here's a little bit about the avian flu, the whole thing going on with that. So just a brief overview. Last March and April out in Arizona, several condors were seen ailing and then quickly died. And over a span of about 3 weeks, 21 condors died in that population. And it was very sudden and, took everybody by surprise. Avian flu, there's a particularly highly pathogenic version of it that's circulating around the United States now. And everybody had it on their radar to be aware of, but it was unclear whether or not it would impact condors. And so to have this happen was definitely an eye-opener, I guess. And so it has prompted quite a lot of work in terms of all the condor managers really trying to prepare as best as possible for another outbreak should it happen, and also just trying to reduce the risk to condors as best as we can. Fortunately, they were able to evacuate one egg from a nest where one of the parents had died, and that egg ended up hatching in captivity and is doing really well. They, I believe, expect to release that bird back out into the wild next season with others of its age. So, there was one very small bright spot out of that whole ordeal. Since then, there's a lot of work going into trying to figure out vaccines. So there is a vaccine that has been available for a while, or sorry, not available. It was developed, but not used in the United States. But the USDA approved vaccine trials for California condors. And so they started with a limited trial in black vultures to see if it worked on the vultures, and then have done a trial in condors now. And the results from that we're still waiting for. So everyone's hoping, crossing lots of fingers that will prove to be an effective tool and hopefully at least help somewhat with the condors to keep these sort of bigger outbreaks from happening. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about with the condors in the news is all these birds that flew up to the Mount Diablo area. So this is a map that shows Pinnacles down toward the bottom of the map and Mount Diablo towards the top. The whole mountain range that connects us is, mostly the Diablo range. And we've had a number of condors over the years going up, pretty much to Livermore since, 2004, I think was the first time. Lots of birds going up there. And so it was fun to see another group go farther. There were about 6 condors in this group that went that far. And so we've seen, a lot of movement and just exciting to see them exploring new parts of their range. And so I'm getting close to the end here. My last topic that I'm going to cover is condor nesting. But do you have any questions about these pieces?
Elaine had a question. You want to ask your question, Elaine?
Oh, yes, I was curious to know how you captured the condors to test them or to treat them.
Yeah, so we have a big box type trap that's connected to the aviary, where we place carcasses down in the bottom of the trap. And so condors perch on the top of it and they drop down into it, and then we just close them in. And then because it's connected to our aviary, we can open the door between the trap and that and let them into the aviary and hold them for a while until we're ready to work them up. So it's a way of trapping condors so that we are not like running right out and grabbing them. And when you do that, you run the risk of them really quickly learning not to ever do that again. So this way that we trap them means that it's a little less stressful, and it separates the moment of being trapped from the time when you're being in hand. Go ahead.
Do you use bait or
Yeah.
carcasses, or what do you use
Yes.
for bait?
Oh, what is the bait? Primarily, we work with dairies for stillborn calves. Mhm.
Okay. Roger?
Oh, I was just wondering about the availability of food for the condors. Several years ago, Audrey and I volunteered in a project to work with European griffins, and the amount of food was an issue because the farmers, the people raising sheep and that, were better at keeping track of them. They had ATVs and stuff, and so there wasn't as much dead meat around on the ground. And related to that, am I correct that condors like to eat beached whales and other sea mammals?
Yeah. Yes. So, in general, we have found that condors do not have a problem in terms of finding food on their own. And there does seem to be enough out there across the landscape, at least, to support as many condors as we can get out into the wild so far. I believe there has been some research into, if we had thousands of condors across the landscape, would there be a limiting factor with food? But I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. But then to your question about what do they eat? Yes, they definitely have been documented feeding on beached whales, regularly on sea lions and seals that die and wash ashore, things like that. And then, certainly cows, horses, other things that are just out there that are, part of the agricultural landscape, I guess. Yeah.
In the same vein, I read or heard a speech about the Mandan Indians in, I guess it was Missouri, that they would overwinter, of course, and it would get very cold and so on, and there wouldn't be much animal life around. But then when the thaw started coming, these dead, previously frozen bison would float down the river, and they'd run out and grab them and pull them ashore and just start eating them because the meat was partially decomposed and it was very tender. And so they thought of it as a delicacy. And
Right.
when you said that without vultures that diseases could spread, right? We didn't know anything about diseases in these Indians. Do you think that thawed meat coming down the river could be infectious with something?
I am not sure. That is definitely a little bit outside of my realm of knowledge on that one. Certainly meat that's out there for a while that has bugs and things that have started to eat it, like there's more of a chance of bacteria being in there. What you're talking about sounds like, things have been sort of iced and refrigerated.
Oh, that's true.
And if you can cut away kind of the worst parts, then it's probably fine. But honestly, I'm really not sure about how that would have worked. And
Okay, well, thanks for your.
yeah, that's an interesting one to think about. All right, so I'm going to talk about, to wrap up here, kind of the real fun stuff with condors is, of course, watching them as they, do what they're supposed to, which is be out there and get down to nesting and breeding and all of that. And so they are really quite entertaining, I must say. Condors do a display when they're getting into breeding season. So this one that you see on the right is just kind of thinking about it. But typically the condor will kind of hold his wings out and like drop his head down, and then he'll kind of go back and forth from one foot to the other doing this little dance. And the female tends to be the one who observes as he kind of circles around her. And so it's really fun to watch them as they do this. And we all get a kick out of the condor soap opera that ensues every spring when they get into breeding season. So condors pair off in general. They do form long-term pairs, but they are not strictly, they don't necessarily mate for life, as we say, right? So in fact, condors we find are kind of a lot like people where, some of them seem to form really long-term bonds that last year after year after year, and others, something happens and they split up and they find different different mates and everything. So there's quite a lot of variety that we end up seeing, but it is common to see a pair nest year after year together. This pair that we're looking at here, 89 and 69, are a long-term pair at Pinnacles. They have been very successful at breeding most years. So just so that you know kind of what condor nests are, a lot of people think about nests as a big stick construct, maybe like what an eagle puts together, but that is not what condors do. They just find a cavity of some variety and lay the egg. So you can see the picture on the left there with the condor perched up above and then sort of a big cavity down below it. And way back in there is a little white egg. I don't know if you can pick that out. And then these other ones are showing different condors in different nests. But I wanted to include a redwood tree on there, which is the lower right-hand picture. That is really an example of a number of the nests in Big Sur. The condors over there really use a lot of redwood trees as nest sites, and they go for like the big hollowed out cavities that are from fire that hit the redwoods. And so those are usually the types of cavities they use in those situations. So these are just kind of looking at what the different types of nests are. And as you can see, there is just the one egg. That's all they do, one at a time. So a little bit of kind of what it looks like for a condor as it gets older. We've got the little teeny one up there with a parent in front of it on the upper left. And then top right is about a month old, kind of like a little Buddha belly sitting there. I think they're adorable. A lot of people think they're pretty weird looking. Some might say they're kind of gross. I would never say that. The bottom left is a 2-month-old bird, and then the one on the bottom right, that's at about 4 months. So you can see still some downy gray feathers, but overall getting a lot of the black feathers growing in. You might be wondering how exactly we have all of these pictures of these up close little guys. And part of that is because we do go into condor nests from time to time. So we go in to check the fertility of the egg sometimes, but we also go in to monitor the health of the chick. Mostly we're doing the same kind of things as we do with the adults. We draw a little bit of blood, we check their lead, but we also monitor the nests to see if there's any trash, because sometimes condor parents bring back bits and pieces of metal and glass and things like that that are really not great for a youngster that's growing. And, they're like toddlers where all they want to do is put everything in their mouths. And so little condors in the nest will eat whatever is brought to them. So these are a couple of pictures of one of my coworkers on rope going down to a nest and also holding a little nestling. But yeah, to that whole idea of trash, this is a bunch of trash that was surgically removed from the gut of a condor nestling. It had so much in there that it couldn't actually eat anymore. And so this is one of the things that we do try to, convey to everybody is like, there's a reason we ask folks to pack it out, right? To leave no trace, as they say. Because even these little bottle caps and pieces of glass, they end up in places that you would not expect. And in some cases, that could be in the gut of a little condor nestling who just can't take anymore. So, we do, when people especially are coming to the park, we ask them, pack out your trash. Don't leave stuff out there, please. But assuming everything goes well, this is what you want to see. A brand new youngster just taking its first flights, perching outside the nest. This was one of the condors that nested it, or that fledged from a nest at Pinnacles a few years ago. And it's just really lovely to just see them once they're out. And so where are we at? Well, I think
I said that Jody Keller has her hand up to ask you a question. Is that appropriate time?
Sure, I'm just about done, but I can take a question.
Okay, I just wondered, unless I missed it, do we know until what age condors lay viable eggs?
We don't know. Yeah, they haven't been living long enough for us to know that. There are some in captivity that are an unknown age, so they're like older than 50 and have stopped laying eggs that are viable. But we don't know if they're 70 or if they're 90 or if they're 55. Like we don't know how old they are. So yeah, it does seem like eventually they do, but we're not sure what that age is yet. Mm-hmm. So the future for condors, is it's mostly bright. We really feel like, if we can crack the problem with lead on the landscape, that condors are going to recover. And so, really working together, getting that message out there. What we find otherwise is, condors are finding food on their own. They are nesting like they should. They're succeeding with getting their young out of the nest and integrated into the whole flock. And so all those things are really great. The condors are doing what they should, even though, every one of them was taken into captivity. And most of the condors we have out in the wild these days have been released from captive breeding programs. But, they all seem to be acting like condors should. But we just have to crack that one piece. We got to switch that ammo from lead to copper, and then we're golden. So that, is a small piece, but it's also a difficult one. And so it is the thing that, we continue to work toward. And all this work of getting condors out there and monitoring them and making sure that they're doing what they're doing helps with that. And we just hope that, over the coming couple of decades, all the effort we've put in so far will truly pay off, and we will see condors, getting off of the endangered species list and just out in the environment as they should be. And so with all of that, I will now open it up to whatever other questions you want to ask me.
Roger has a question queued up.
Okay, so my question was about observing and photographing. And my experience with observing condors is that there are these little black spots that are going across the sky. So you guys obviously have some better techniques. And you mentioned about the rappelling and all that. But do you use drones, or do you use live cams or anything like that?
We don't use drones. We do have some cameras that we've installed in nests that we use for monitoring. A lot of the pictures in this slideshow were taken by Gavin Emmons. He is a biologist here at Pinnacles, who is also an excellent photographer. and does a lot of the work with us getting into condor nests. So this picture right here that we're looking at is one of his. The opportunities to get, that close to condors are definitely reserved for those folks that are doing this kind of work. But I will say there are some folks who definitely get fantastic photos, but boy, does it take some patience. Tim Huntington, you should look him up. He's online. He is one of the folks that volunteers with Ventana Wildlife Society. He has amazing photos of condors on the coast and condors at Pinnacles. He comes over to Pinnacles pretty often. You really have to go to a spot where condors often are, and then just wait. And eventually you get lucky.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a lot of patience to get the up close or relatively close photos of condors in flight or perching in trees or on the rocks and things like that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had one other thing I wanted to bring up, if I might, and ask sort of a devil's advocate question that maybe some other members of our audience could come in on. And that is why save condors? I mean, if you have black vultures and turkey vultures that can clean up the mess, why couldn't you just let them do it? And I mean, granted, it's a charismatic species, but is there something about condors that's special that we ought to pay more attention to? Or anyway, I'd just like to hear people's opinions about that.
I can certainly jump in with mine, but I would be interested to hear what others think about that too.
Does anybody think we ought to just say, let them go because they're obviously doomed?
Of course not. We wouldn't be watching.
So that's an interesting topic, and that actually was a very big part of when condors were brought into captivity back in the 80s. There was a large group of folks that really felt like, maybe it was called sort of death with dignity for the condors. Like, just let them be wild, and if they can't survive, that's perhaps just their fate. I would say in general, of course, working with condors as much as I do, I do not subscribe to that particular thought, but I imagine that would be expected. And, to me, part of it is extinction is forever. And while we may not know every piece of how condors are important to the ecosystem or things like that, what we do know is that the major reason for their decline is human related. And so to me, I feel like a responsibility on our part to try our best to keep them alive and make the landscape a place that they can live as well. And really, that thing of it just being the switching to a different kind of ammunition is a fairly small ask in the overall scheme. So it's different than some birds where there is just absolutely no habitat left for them. That's a harder thing to tackle, but this one is feasible, and I think we can do it. And so those are the reasons that I feel like we should not give up on condors and do our best to bring them back and get them off the endangered species list.
Michael Asher has a quick question or comment.
A comment about lead. Lead is used because you can melt it and make your own bullets. It's very efficient and very inexpensive, where if you buy ammunition is not so inexpensive. So most shooters and hunters, or many of them, make their own bullets. And I lived next door to a falconer as a kid, and he shot pigeons for his birds and used plastic bullets. And that's 60 years ago they knew about it. So it was successful. They don't go very far because you don't want a plastic bullet will get a little wonky after a while, shoot it too far. But that was used in those days, so it's interesting. But lead is very popular because you can melt it. You can't do copper, you can't do steel. And you go online, you see lots of people making bullets.
Yeah, that's true. There are a lot of folks that load their own.
And if you have 4 or 5 different guns, you can make them all.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Sheila has a question. Sheila, do you want to unmute yourself?
I was just thinking about something, and I don't know if it's not a question, but it's just something. Why would people shoot something and then just leave it for condors to come and eat? It's, it makes no sense that a hunter would just leave his prey that he'd killed.
Yep, right. Yes, so overall, actually, it's not the whole body of something that a hunter shot that is left. A lot of hunters will gut an animal while they're out. If they've shot an animal, they'll gut it first and then transport what they want with them out of the field. And so the gut pile is left out on the landscape, and that can have a lot of lead in it if they've used a lead bullet. And then the other thing is there is quite a bit of depredation where, shooting coyotes or ground squirrels or other things like that, where the idea is not to eat the animal, it's just to get rid of it because it's a pest or it's getting into things or a threat of some sort. So that is another piece of it where it's not hunting for food in that case.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand.
No. I think you've all been very, very good about contributing and asking questions and stuff. Has made it very interesting to me as well. And Alacia, I want to thank you very much for your very interesting talk, very organized and very informative about these condors. And I hope they keep coming on. You didn't say much about the flu, the bird flu. Is that something that's imminent or?
So the avian flu is definitely around, and so every condor program that is here, is trying to figure out what to do about that. So we are, we're hoping the vaccine will be usable and that will work. And then also, each site is kind of preparing as best we can if it were to show up, how we would manage that and reduce the risk to the different condors that we have. So it is a tough one. And, if anybody is interested in more information about that, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a good webpage they've put together that is all about the California condor and the response to, it's called highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI. So that's a good resource. But it is something we are all concerned about and that we're all taking what steps we can to address it.
Good. Good. Well, that's it from me. Thank you very much again, Alacia. Very, very good talk.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, great. Well,